ruling on Trump's immunity motion in New York. Judge Marchand has yet to rule on Trump's request to postpone his sentencing until after the election. So Trump's lawyers are throwing another Hail Mary on that. Late Thursday, his lawyers filed to move the matter to federal court in yet another delay tactic, citing the Supreme Court's ruling in July. A federal judge has rejected that effort for now, but advised it could be refiled with either opposing parties' written consent or court's leave. It is not the first time Trump's lawyers have tried to get the hush money case moved to federal court. His lawyers invoked presidential immunity in a failed bid last July, setting the stage for his trial and conviction on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records. Last year, federal judge Alvin Hallerstein ruled that the evidence presented involved something personal to the president, quote, a cover-up of an embarrassing event. Hush money paid to an adult film star is not related to a president's official acts. It does not reflect in any way the color of the president's official duties. I cannot believe a judge had to actually say that and that I had to read it to you. But here is where we are. Joining me now is Andrew Weissman, MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, and Maya Wiley, president and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights and former assistant U.S. attorney. That was a lot, friends. I'm going to start with you, Andrew, because it's a lot to parse through.
Totally.
But I want to start with whether or not Donald Trump has any chance of taking that 34-count felony conviction and somehow moving it to federal court in order to throw it out based on what the Supreme Court has ruled.
So the direct answer is it is highly unlikely that he is going to be able to get it to federal court. As you noted, he has made that motion and lost it.
Yeah.
And, the only intervening fact is this Supreme Court decision that should not be enough to have Judge Hellerstein revisit his ruling. Remember, though, that whether it's in state court or it's in federal court, that changes who the judge is. But whether the Supreme Court gets to ultimately weigh in on the 34 counts to say were they tainted by immunized testimony is something that the Supreme Court of the United States gets to weigh in on eventually. That's what I'm sort of mostly worried about.
Yes.
Because even if it goes through the state court process, eventually Donald Trump
get it back.
gets to exactly.
And it's clear to me, and I think it's now clear to most of our fair viewers, that John Roberts is going to protect Trump. And that if at the moment he gets it back, he's going to find a way to get him out of going to jail, right? That's what's happening.
Well, let's just say it's not a very positive Supreme Court if we care about the Constitution and if we care about the rule of law. And that is our reality. I mean, but look, going back to what Andrew's so rightly said, I think we also have to remember that part of what we're seeing here is every effort to ensure the delay.
Right.
Because it is consequential if the American public that has to make a decision about how to cast a ballot is seeing Donald Trump repeatedly in a courtroom. Because that visual alone is unheard of in our history. And so whether it is now or later, what they're just trying to make sure is it's later, so that they're actually in a position where voters are not being reminded constantly that not only is he a convicted felon, but that it may make a difference what happens to him after an election.
Yeah, and by the way, let's put the calendar back up on that point. This is the calendar again. So you see the first date in this calendar once it's up there? September 5th, this hearing in the federal election interference case. The day after that, North Carolina starts early voting. So people will be voting between that hearing and the debate with Vice President Harris. Before the debate even happens, one state will already be early voting, Maya. This is going to be a thing that's happening regardless of the outcome on the 6th.
And it's a state in play. Right.
And it's a state very much in play.
There's a lot of money being spent by the Trump campaign in North Carolina right now.
Yeah.
And so, again, they're really looking at this, I think, no personal knowledge, but they're looking at this and they're seeing the chessboard and they want to make sure other people aren't looking at it too.
Well, the way that I think the rest of us are looking at it, though, is a rule of law question. Here, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson does not do a lot of interviews. She's not done very many interviews. She's now done one. And this is her talking about that Supreme Court immunity ruling. Here she is.
you were concerned about broad immunity?
I was concerned about a system that appeared to provide immunity for one individual under one set of circumstances, when we have a criminal justice system that had ordinarily treated everyone the same.
And I just, to that point, want to quote from the filing by Donald Trump's legal team asking the federal court to take over that hush money case, because it goes to this. Accordingly, they call him still President Trump. Respectfully request that the court accept this second removal notice, confirm that Justice Marchand may not sentence President Trump during litigation over the second removal notice. They're leaning into his former role and saying, essentially, you can't touch him while this election is happening.
Look, what we're really talking about, take the lens out, is the American legal system has failed. This is one where, unlike other legal systems around the globe that have managed to hold political leaders to account, we have not.
Yeah.
Donald Trump has figured out a way to play the system, and he's been aided and abetted by the Supreme Court, by Judge Cannon, to slow things down so that the actual sort of accountability is, whether guilty or not guilty, is that day of reckoning is put off. Now in New York, it's about putting off the day of reckoning of sentencing, because Judge Marchand, to his credit, at least got that case to trial. But this is really, you know, sort of a grade. I'm a professor, so I give grades. This is sort of an F for how we fare compared to so many other sort of so-called Western democracies that do actually know how to hold people to account.
And the thing that makes it even worse, to be honest, is that it feels in some ways like the conservative members of the Supreme Court are doing it also in their own self-interest, because I think everyone understands that Samuel Alito and Clarence Thomas will retire immediately upon the inauguration of another Republican president. If Trump comes in, they go out, and allowing the Heritage Foundation, the same group that's put all six of them on the bench, to put two 30 or 40-year-old versions of them on the bench. We kind of know who they are. There's some of the judges who have made some of the most insane rulings to the far right, and we know that is what's going to happen. So you have just John Roberts, who is sort of portrayed as this sort of moderate, normal person, but it's clear that he's down with that. He wants that.
So, you know, look, to Andrew's point and to your point, Joy, the system, the judicial system has failed, and I do say judicial. I mean, the civil side actually did work when it came to Donald Trump, right? It really is the criminal, but it's also the Supreme Court by not holding to our constitutional, not just norms, but precedents. I mean, they butchered the precedents in their opinion on immunity, and they butchered them over and over and over again whenever it comes to the guardrails.
Section 3 of the 14th Amendment apparently does not exist.
Exactly.
They wrote that on accident.
Exactly. So, but I think the point here, coming back to the importance of the calendar that you pointed to, and how a democracy fixes the problem of a failure of a democratic system like the court system, is elections. And so the importance of not losing the court date, and I do mean this in the Judge Marchand case, to remind folks of what's at stake, because Project 2025, just as you just did a segment on, you know, the difference between who is in office and how they utilize a power that the Supreme Court says they have to be protected from the accountability of the judicial system. The way that they can utilize the Department of Justice is actually on the ballot.
100%.
So I think it's actually critically important that the date hold, because I think it's important that Americans be reminded of what questions they need to answer for themselves when they show up at the polls.
That's right, because how Donald Trump would use that power versus how Kamala Harris would use it, very different. And he has made it clear he will use it to harm people he thinks are his enemies. But I wanted to just do one note on Jack Smith, because I do think that Jack Smith is kind of a bright light in an otherwise pretty dark landscape. And I include Merrick Garland in the dark, okay, because I don't think he's done hardly anything to be helpful. But Jack Smith is persistent. This superseding indictment, how effective is it at trying to finally get us to some sort of an answer, at least on the charges of trying to overthrow the government?
So, one, I completely agree with you with Jack Smith. Yeah, he is smart and tenacious, and you have to be tenacious in this landscape with what he's had to put up with, whether it's Judge Cannon or the Supreme Court. And he's done two things. One, everyone's focused a lot on the deletions, which is he deleted material to make it conform to what he has to, which is the Supreme Court decision. He's stuck with that. So they just, from that, the case is weaker. He had to take out certain allegations, the material about the president's interactions with the Department of Justice. I just want to say it because it's so outrageous, meaning that the president can tell his Department of Justice to engage in a sham investigation. Yeah. He's immune. So that is not in the case because the Supreme Court has said that is a core presidential function, engaging in a sham investigation.
And can we just pull back on that for a moment? Because that means that Donald Trump, if he came back in, could say, investigate Barack Obama, I'm going to make up and invent a crime, and that is literally legal for him to do, according to John Roberts.
That is absolutely right. He cannot be prosecuted for that. That is a core presidential function. It is beyond shocking that is something that Supreme Court wrote here. It was clearly just tailored to the situation here. The other thing there that Jack Smith did is he added various allegations to make it clear that what remains in the case is either personal conduct or conduct as a candidate, not as a president. Yeah. So he has grand jury findings on that. So he added in a lot of language to make that clear. He also dealt with a new obstruction decision from the Supreme Court to make it clear that Donald Trump did obstruct, that he involved allegations involving what he was going to do with physical ballots, because remember the Supreme Court said that's part of obstruction now, is that has to do with the actual documents that are going to Congress. And Jack Smith said, yes, that's what happened here. So he really looked at what the Supreme Court had done and then tailored it to deal with that. We'll see what happens today. And then in terms of the one thing that could happen is there could be a hearing, the so-called mini trial, and it'll be interesting to see what the parties say about that. Yeah. And then obviously next week we'll know whether Judge Chutkan is going to order that before the general election.
I hope that he is successful. He is the one. He's making us feel a little tiny bit hopeful. I just want to note for our audience that Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the two Georgia election workers, they are asking the court to control Rudy Giuliani's assets after his $148 million judgment. If you want to have a final word on that, I mean, they should get that money, right? All his money.
They should get all that money.
All of it.
And we also should remember that what they faced and suffered. Yes. We have other folks that may face it and suffer it in this cycle.
That's right.
So it is critically important that all of the accountability be enforced.
I want to note that the Arlington National Cemetery Army employee was afraid to file charges after essentially being physically, we could say, assaulted, physically pushed. We don't know what happened, but they were too afraid to file charges because they're afraid of Donald Trump's base. That is how low we have sunk. Andrew Weissman, Maya Wiley, always a pleasure. Thank you very much. And coming up, securing the Latino vote will be crucial in this year's presidential election. We will take a deeper look at that very important voting bloc next.
The more love we give, the more love we feel. The more love we feel, the more rainbows we puke. The more rainbows we puke, the more oranges we anthropomorphize. The more oranges we anthropomorphize, the more dear we become. The more dear we become, the more friends we find. The more friends we find, the more our friends find us. The more our friends find us, the more love we feel. The more love we feel, the more love we give.
There's a power within each of us. When awakened, it can boost performance, enhance learning, even help you work smarter. And you can unlock it with one simple